All right, fellow voyagers on the Sea of Sound, welcome. Before we embark on this rather intriguing expedition into the annals of progressive rock, a quick but vital request. If you find yourself captivated by the esoteric and the extraordinary in music, do make sure you're subscribed to our channel, Psych Prog. Go on, hit that like button, and please share this exploration with as many curious minds as you can. Your support truly fuels these deep dives. Now, have you ever found yourself utterly transfixed by a band, not just by their sonic architecture, but by the very enigma of their name? A name that seems to whisper of complexities and contradictions, hinting at the universe of music held within. Today we turn our scholarly yet passionate gaze towards one of progressive rock's most dazzlingly intricate, and perhaps consequently, sometimes maddeningly underrated ensembles, Gentle Giant. The question that has echoed through fanzines, online forums, and late-night discussions for decades is deceptively simple. What is the true origin of their name? Is it a literary illusion, a whimsical fancy, or something far more prosaic, yet equally revealing? Prepare yourselves, for the answer, much like their music, is not a straightforward chord progression. To truly appreciate the quest for Gentle Giant's nominal genesis, we must first immerse ourselves, not just briefly, but with a considered depth, in the cultural and musical milieu from which they emerged, a period so vibrant and transformative that its echoes still resonate powerfully within contemporary artistic expression. The late 1960s and early 1970s were far more than a mere crucible of experimentation. They represented a seismic shift in popular culture, a veritable Cambrian explosion of musical forms. Rock music, having decisively shed its adolescent skin of simpler three-chord structures and boy-meets-girl lyrical themes, was experiencing a profound identity crisis, or rather, an exhilarating identity expansion. It was aspiring, with an almost defiant audacity, to the condition of art, with a capital A. This aspiration wasn't simply about longer songs or more complex instrumentation. It was a fundamental re-evaluation of what rock music could be, what it could say, and how it could interact with other artistic traditions. The movement sought to integrate the vast structural ambitions and harmonic language of European classical music, stretching from the intricate counterpoint of the Baroque masters like Bach to the sweeping romanticism of the 19th century and even the dissonant explorations of early 20th century modernism. Simultaneously, it embraced the improvisational freedom and sophisticated harmonic sensibilities of jazz, particularly the modal and free jazz movements that were pushing boundaries in their own right. Furthermore, there was a deep engagement with the narrative depth and symbolic richness of literature, mythology, science fiction, and even esoteric philosophy, transforming albums into conceptual journeys and lyrical tapestries. This was the extraordinarily fertile, intellectually charged, and often wildly experimental ground of progressive rock. It was a movement that championed not just virtuosity for its own sake, though technical skill was certainly a hallmark, but virtuosity in service of a grander artistic vision. Conceptual albums became de rigueur. Song suites replaced individual tracks, and the 3-minute pop single, the bedrock of commercial radio, was often viewed with suspicion, if not outright disdain, by the movement's more purist adherents. Bands like Yes were constructing ethereal, mystical soundscapes, their music soaring with John Anderson's otherworldly vocals and Steve Howe's intricate guitar tapestries. Genesis, under Peter Gabriel's theatrical stewardship, was crafting elaborate, narrative suites, rich in allegory and social commentary, their music a blend of pastoral English folk and dramatic rock crescendos. King Crimson, helmed by the enigmatic Robert Fripp, delved into darker, more abrasive territories, pushing the boundaries of dissonance and rhythmic complexity, their improvisations often teetering on the edge of chaos. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, meanwhile, were flamboyant titans adapting classical masterpieces with bombastic energy and showcasing Keith Emerson's dazzling and sometimes controversial keyboard pyrotechnics. Each of these groups, and many others like Van der Graaf Generator with their existential angst, or Jethro Tull with their folk-infused, often satirical critiques, were erecting their own unique cathedrals of sound, each distinct in its architectural style, its thematic concerns, and its sonic signature. Yet, Even within this diverse and audacious cohort of innovators, a band like Gentle Giant managed to carve out a niche so profoundly singular, so idiosyncratically themselves, that they often seem to exist in a parallel dimension of musical thought, operating under a set of rules and aesthetic principles entirely of their own devising. Their music was, in many ways, an even more concentrated distillation of the progressive ideal, taking the fusion of disparate elements to an unprecedented level of integration and complexity, founded by the immensely talented, and one might argue, genetically predisposed Shulman brothers, Derek, the pragmatic frontman and saxophonist, Ray, the virtuosic bassist and violinist, and Phil, the eldest, a multi-instrumentalist whose saxophone and clarinet work harked back to earlier jazz traditions. The band's origins were somewhat less auspicious, at least in terms of their later artistic direction. They had previously tasted the fleeting sweetness of pop success in the mid-1960s as Simon Dupree and the Big Sound, a band known for their psychedelic pop hit Kites. However, this earlier incarnation, while providing valuable experience in the music industry and honing their performance skills, represented a creative straitjacket from which they were increasingly desperate to escape. That past, with its commercial imperatives and stylistic limitations, was something they were keen to transcend, to shed like an outgrown skin. Gentle Giant, therefore, was conceived not merely as a new band, but as a deliberate and radical departure, a vehicle for uncompromised, unfiltered musical expression. Their internal mandate, forged in the crucible of their shared ambition and a certain weariness with the ephemeral nature of pop, was crystal clear from the outset: to create music that would relentlessly challenge both the listener and, perhaps, even more importantly, themselves as musicians and composers. This meant consciously eschewing the well-trodden paths of commercial appeal, turning their backs on the pursuit of chart success in favor of an unwavering commitment to artistic integrity and innovation. Their compositions were, and indeed remain for anyone who ventures into their discography today, a marvel of intellectual design and breathtaking execution. They reveled in contrapuntal wizardry, weaving multiple independent melodic lines together, with a skill that would have made a Renaissance composer nod in appreciation. Their music was shot through with polyrhythmic complexity, where different, often conflicting, rhythmic patterns would coexist, creating a sense of dynamic tension and exhilarating unpredictability. Their stylistic palette was astonishingly broad and seamlessly integrated. They drew as readily and as authentically from the formal structures and timbres of medieval plainsong and Renaissance dances, utilizing instruments like recorders, crumhorns, and viols, as they did from the raw energy of rock, the improvisational spirit of blues, and the sophisticated harmonic language of avant-garde jazz. Vocals, often shared among several members, would frequently interweave in intricate madrigal-like harmonies, creating dense, shimmering textures that were a world away from the typical rock vocal approach. Perhaps most famously, instruments would be passed around on stage with a bewildering, almost circus-like dexterity. It was not uncommon to see one member switch from guitar to trumpet to recorder to percussion within the space of a single song, a testament to their renowned multi-instrumentalism. That was not mere gimmickry, but an integral part of their compositional and performance aesthetic. Melodies, far from following predictable diatonic paths, would take hairpin turns, modulate unexpectedly, and often defy conventional expectations of resolution, keeping the listener constantly engaged and on their toes. This was emphatically not background music, not something to be idly consumed. This was music that demanded and richly rewarded active, engaged, and often repeated listening. It was, in its very essence, profoundly intellectual rock, music that appealed as much to the mind as it did to the ears and the gut, a quality that perhaps contributed to their cult status rather than mainstream ubiquity. They were, in a sense, musicians' and thinkers' rockers. So how does a band so resolutely dedicated to such sophisticated, often dauntingly intricate, and intellectually demanding music arrive at a name as seemingly straightforward, yet subtly evocative, as Gentle Giant? The juxtaposition inherent in the name itself, that elegant oxymoron, seems to perfectly and almost poetically encapsulate the very core of their sound and their artistic philosophy. The gentle component speaks volumes, referring perhaps to their intricate, almost pointillistic handling of melody and harmony, the filigree detail in their arrangements. It evokes their beautifully crafted acoustic passages, which often feature delicate interplay between violin, cello, recorders, and acoustic guitars, creating moments of pastoral beauty and quiet contemplation. It also hints at the often whimsical, folk-inflected, and sometimes even childlike wonder that could surface in their melodies and lyrical themes, a playful counterpoint to their more overtly serious musical explorations. Then, there is the giant aspect, a word that immediately alludes to the sheer, unadulterated power and formidable complexity of their compositions. It speaks to the intellectual weight of their music, the often thunderous rock passages driven by Gary Green's incisive guitar work and John Weather's dynamic drumming. It reflects the colossal ambition of their musical vision, their fearless willingness to tackle extended forms, unconventional structures, and challenging thematic material. It's a beautifully resonant paradox, a concise yet profound emblem for their artistic philosophy, a verbal encapsulation of their unique sonic signature. But the crucial question remains: was this perfect synergy between name and music a happy accident, a moment of serendipitous inspiration, or was it the result of deliberate, conscious design, a carefully chosen banner under which to march their unconventional musical army? The answer, as one might expect from a band of such labyrinthine creativity, is not a simple one. The most pervasive and indeed the most frequently cited theory in academic circles, rock encyclopedias and fan lore, points with a confident finger towards the vast, sprawling, and often delightfully scatological world of François Rabelais. This towering figure of the 16th century French Renaissance, a writer, physician, humanist, and Benedictine monk, bequeathed to literature his magnum opus, The Life of Gargantua and of Pantagruel. This series of 5 novels is a satirical and fantastical narrative, a veritable cornucopia teeming with larger-than-life characters, profound, if often eccentrically presented, learning, and a robust, earthy, often bawdy humor that challenged the pieties and hypocrisies of his time. Central to these carnivalesque tales is the figure of Gargantua, a benevolent giant of prodigious appetite, for food, for drink, for knowledge, and a correspondingly prodigious intellect. The very notion of a gentle giant character, a being possessing immense physical power yet imbued with a fundamentally kind, thoughtful, or even scholarly nature, certainly resonates deeply with Rabelaisian themes and character archetypes. Gargantua, despite his colossal size and often outrageous adventures, is frequently portrayed as wise, humane, and a champion of enlightened education, particularly in the utopian abbey of Theleme, whose motto was, "Do what thou wilt, feci que voudras," a sentiment that, in its emphasis on individual freedom and the pursuit of knowledge, might have appealed to the countercultural sensibilities of the late 1960s. Scholars of Renaissance literature and cultural history would immediately recognize the potential allure of such a sophisticated literary allusion for a band so clearly steeped in and drawing inspiration from historical musical forms and intellectual traditions. Indeed, the very spirit of Rabelais, learned, fiercely unconventional, critical of dogmatism, and unafraid to challenge established norms with wit and erudition, aligns remarkably well with Gentle Giant's own artistic temperament and their defiant stance against the formulaic tendencies of mainstream popular music. Many contemporaneous articles from the 1970s music press, as well as later critical analyses and academic studies of progressive rock, often make this connection to Rabelais, sometimes presenting it almost as a given, an undisputed piece of foundational lore, lending it an air of established, almost canonical fact. The undeniable erudition implied by such a literary reference would certainly fit the band's carefully cultivated intellectual profile. It paints a compelling picture of a group deliberately choosing a name that signals their artistic depth, their connection to a longer tradition of sophisticated and challenging art, and their conscious departure from the more straightforwardly visceral or hedonistic concerns of much mainstream rock music of the era. This theory is undeniably elegant. It is culturally rich, intellectually satisfying, and, on an intuitive level, it feels right, doesn't it? It suggests a band fully aware of their artistic antecedents and their own unique place within the musical landscape, consciously positioning themselves within a lineage of sophisticated, challenging, and often subversive art. However, the path to unearthing historical truth, especially in the often mythologized world of rock music history, is seldom so neatly paved or clearly signposted. While the Rabelaisian connection is undeniably appealing, possessing a certain intellectual cachet, and has been propagated with considerable verve and conviction by critics and fans alike for decades, it hangs in a somewhat nebulous, almost translucent space when one diligently seeks direct, unequivocal, and contemporaneous confirmation from the band members themselves, particularly in their earliest interviews from the formative period of 1970-1971. This is precisely where a significant point of tension arises, a subtle but persistent crack in the seemingly solid edifice of this widely accepted origin story. Could it be, one is forced to ponder, that this rather convenient literary attribution, however fitting and insightful it may retrospectively appear, is more of an after-the-fact academic gloss, a sophisticated intellectual peg upon which critics and culturally attuned fans have chosen to hang the band's complex identity, rather than the explicit, foundational, and conscious intent of the band members at the moment of the name's conception? The undeniable allure of a high-culture reference, the satisfying click of connecting a modern rock band to a Renaissance literary giant, can sometimes overshadow simpler, more prosaic, or even more serendipitous beginnings. This is especially true when a band's music itself, with its intricate structures and historical allusions, actively invites such sophisticated interpretations and encourages the search for deeper, more learned meanings. We find ourselves, therefore, at a critical juncture in our investigation. Is the most frequently repeated story necessarily the truest one, or has its constant, almost liturgical repetition over many years granted it a verisimilitude, a veneer of truth that it didn't initially possess in quite the same definitive way? The challenge for us, as discerning listeners, passionate fans, and amateur musicologists, is to meticulously sift through the accumulated layers of received wisdom, critical interpretation, and fan-generated mythology, and to seek out, with an open yet critical mind, the band's own voice, their own recollections, however fragmented or inconsistent they might sometimes be, in this fascinating matter of their nominal origins. This requires a careful weighing of evidence, a sensitivity to nuance, and an understanding of how collective memory and storytelling can shape and reshape the past. Let's pause here for a moment, fellow explorers of the sonic labyrinth. If this journey into the heart of progressive rock's nomenclature, this peeling back of layers to uncover the core of a band's identity, is sparking your curiosity and igniting your passion for musical deep dives, then please remember that your support for PsychProg is what makes these expeditions possible. A quick click on the like button, a share of this video with other musically adventurous souls, or, if you haven't already, a new subscription to our channel. All these actions, however small they may seem, help us to continue to unearth these fascinating stories, analyze these complex soundscapes, and share our discoveries with you. Your engagement is, quite literally, the lifeblood of channels like ours, the wind in our sails as we navigate the vast and often uncharted oceans of musical history. Now, to continue our meticulous investigation into the etymology of gentle giant, we must conscientiously consider alternative narratives, or perhaps more accurately, complementary facets and contributing threads that might weave into the larger tapestry of the Rabelaisian theory. Another, less frequently cited, but in its own way equally charming and plausible, story suggests that the name was inspired not by a weighty Renaissance tome, but by a character encountered in a children's story or a piece of traditional folklore, perhaps stumbled upon by one of the band members or someone in their immediate circle during that formative period. This version posits a more whimsical, less consciously academic, and perhaps more serendipitous origin. Picture this, if you will, a fledgling band, acutely aware of the unique and paradoxical nature of the music they are beginning to create, actively searching for a name that can somehow capture this inherent dichotomy. Then, one of them, perhaps, browsing in a dusty second-hand bookshop or recalling a half-forgotten tale from childhood, stumbles upon a phrase or a character in a perhaps long-lost children's book or a collection of folk tales, a narrative depicting a large, physically imposing being, a giant, who is nonetheless portrayed as possessing a kind, gentle, or even artistically sensitive nature. This too has a certain undeniable appeal, a different kind of resonance. It speaks to a more organic, less self-consciously prog or overtly intellectual process of naming. It might reflect the band's desire for a name that was, above all, memorable, evocative, and intriguing, without necessarily being perceived as overly pretentious or weighed down by arcane literary baggage, even if their music itself was complex. It's vitally important to remember that for all their formidable musical complexity, their dizzying instrumental prowess, and their often serious conceptual frameworks, there was frequently a playful, almost childlike wonder, a sense of innocent delight, present in some of Gentle Giant's melodies, instrumental textures, and even their on-stage interactions. Think, for instance, of the intricate, almost toy-like sounds created by Carrie Minnear's tuned percussion and keyboards in a piece like The Advent of Panurge from Octopus, or the gleeful, almost manic vocal interplay and hocketing in Knots from the same album, a musical setting of R.D. Laing's psychological poetry. A name plucked from a more innocent, perhaps even naive source, would not be entirely out of character with this less discussed but equally valid facet of their artistic personality. It suggests a certain unpretentious quality that could coexist with their profound musicianship. The crucial evidence, as is so often the case in historical inquiries, particularly those reliant on human memory and anecdotal accounts, lies in the direct testimonies, however varied or occasionally contradictory, of the band members themselves. In a variety of interviews conducted over the span of many years, from the height of their career in the 1970s to more reflective conversations in recent decades, particularly those given by the articulate Shulman brothers, Derek and Ray, a slightly different, and perhaps ultimately more definitive, or at least more grounded, picture begins to emerge. While they haven't always vehemently or consistently denied the Rabelaisian connection when it's put to them by interviewers, perhaps even appreciating its retroactive aptness and the intellectual gloss it lends their image, their own primary accounts tend to gravitate towards a more pragmatic, though still undeniably thoughtful and deliberate, origin for the name. Ray Shulman, for instance, in a detailed 2003 interview for the esteemed Progression magazine, issue 42, meticulously conducted by John Colling, and Derek Shulman in other scattered recollections and liner notes for reissues, have indicated, with a fair degree of consistency, that the name Gentle Giant was indeed chosen, first and foremost, to reflect and articulate the band's inherent musical duality. They were consciously seeking a moniker that would encapsulate the striking contrast between their powerful, aggressive, complex rock sound, the giant aspect, and their more delicate, intricate, classically influenced, folk-tinged, and sometimes whimsical or pastoral passages, the gentle side of their musical personality. The specific phrase Gentle Giant itself, according to some of these accounts, was reputedly suggested not by one of the band members after a deep dive into Renaissance literature, but perhaps by their manager at the time, or possibly even a creatively minded figure from their record label, Vertigo Records, a label known for its roster of progressive and adventurous artists, who, upon hearing their early demos or rehearsals, was struggling to find a concise way to describe their unique and seemingly contradictory sound to potential audiences and industry contacts. Such a suggestion from a managerial or label perspective would have been driven by a very practical need: how to brand and market a band that so thoroughly defied easy categorization. One particular anecdote, or perhaps a recurring motif in the various retellings of the name's origin that has surfaced with some consistency over the years, and therefore seems to carry a significant weight of authenticity, concerns a specific character or image that was indeed encountered, though not necessarily by the band members directly through a focused, scholarly deep dive into Rabelais' complete oeuvre. The story, as pieced together from these fragments, goes something like this. Someone associated with the band in its nascent stages, perhaps a friend, a roadie, the aforementioned manager, or even one of the members in a more casual, passing encounter, recalled a character from a tale. This tale could well have been a folk tale, a children's story. lending credence to the alternative theory discussed earlier, or even a piece of popular illustration or ephemera. This character was, according to this narrative thread, a literal, gentle giant, a large, physically imposing, perhaps even fearsome-looking figure who, paradoxically, played a musical instrument, often a trumpet or some other wind instrument, with great skill, delicacy, and profound sensitivity. This evocative image, this potent visual and conceptual metaphor of immense physical presence combined with artistic delicacy and soulful expression, immediately struck a chord with the band members. It resonated deeply because it was less about a direct, scholarly engagement with the entirety of Rabelais's complex satirical world, and more about a singular, powerful, and easily graspable resonant image or phrase that perfectly, almost miraculously, captured the very essence of what they were striving to achieve musically. This version of events elegantly synthesizes elements of both the deliberate conceptual choice, they wanted a name reflecting their duality, and the whimsical or serendipitous discovery narratives. The specific phrase or image might have come from an unexpected source. It suggests a more organic process where a conceptual need met a fortuitous discovery. Therefore, the truth, if such a singular entity can ever be definitively pinned down in the fluid dynamics of creative genesis and collective memory, likely resides not in one exclusive explanation, but in a subtle and fascinating confluence of these various factors and influences. The band, acutely aware from the very beginning of their unique and challenging musical proposition, actively sought a name that would effectively signify and communicate this inherent duality. The phrase gentle giant was either coined by someone perceptive enough to grasp their essence, or it was discovered, perhaps serendipitously, in a forgotten corner of popular or folk culture. Crucially, its inherent paradox, its eloquent yoking of power and grace, complexity and charm, the formidable and the tender, was immediately recognized by the Schulmans and their bandmates as an ideal, almost tailor-made, fit for their musical identity. The Rabelaisian figure of Gargantua, then, even if not the direct primary and consciously chosen source of the name, certainly served and continues to serve as a powerful and culturally rich analog, a kind of retroactive validation or intellectual deepening of the name's significance. It provided a pre-existing cultural touchstone that resonated with the band's own artistic leanings, and it offered critics and fans a sophisticated framework for understanding their multifaceted art. It's quite plausible, indeed highly probable, that the band members or those in their creative circle were at least peripherally aware of the Rabelaisian connotation, and this awareness undoubtedly added to the name's appeal and its perceived intellectual heft, even if it wasn't the sole, initial, or most direct inspiration. The world of artistic creativity, after all, is rarely a simple linear path from A to B. It's far more often a complex, interwoven tapestry, woven from multiple threads of conscious design, subconscious influence, happy accident, serendipitous discovery, and pragmatic necessity. The final choice of a band name is often the result of such a dynamic interplay. What's truly remarkable, and perhaps ultimately more important than the precise etymological root, is how perfectly the name Gentle Giant, regardless of its exact genesis, foreshadowed, encapsulated, and continues to illuminate the band's enduring and extraordinary musical legacy. Their entire recorded oeuvre, from their self-titled debut in 1970 to their final studio album Civilian in 1980, stands as a powerful and consistent testament to this central duality. To experience this, one need only listen with attentive ears. Listen, for example, to the intricate, almost fragile chamber music beauty of Funny Ways from their debut album, with its delicate, almost whispered interplay of violin, cello, recorders, and Derek Schulman's nuanced vocals, and you hear unequivocally the gentle aspect in all its refined glory. Then, immediately immerse yourself in the ferocious polyrhythmic complexity and the sheer intellectual and sonic drive of a track like Proclamation from their 1974 masterpiece The Power and the Glory, or the aggressive, angular instrumental Workouts and Aspirations from the same album, and you experience with visceral impact the undeniable presence of the giant. Their music was a constant, dynamic, and masterfully controlled negotiation between these apparent poles. the learned, almost austere counterpoint reminiscent of Johann Sebastian Bach existing side by side with raw, blues-inflected guitar riffs from Gary Green. Ethereal, medieval-inspired vocal harmonies soaring over intricate, syncopated, jazz-inflected rhythms laid down by the formidable rhythm section of Ray Shulman and drummers Martin Smith, Malcolm Mortimer, or John Pugwash. Weathers. They were, in every conceivable sense of the words, musical giants who handled their immense collective talent and formidable power with an astonishing, often breathtaking, gentleness, precision, and profound musical intelligence. Their instrumental dexterity was legendary, but it was always in service of the music's intricate design, never mere empty showmanship. The suspense in this investigation, then, isn't so much in uncovering a single, definitive, aha moment of nominal origin, a solitary, unambiguous source for the name. Rather, the true fascination lies in appreciating how a name, possibly born from a confluence of conscious branding efforts, serendipitous inspiration, and a deep understanding of their own artistic identity, could so perfectly mirror and illuminate a band's complex, multifaceted, and deeply original artistic soul. The expectation we, as listeners and admirers, should have when approaching Gentle Giant is not for easy answers or straightforward musical experiences, but for rich, rewarding, and often challenging complexities, both in their densely layered music and in the intriguing stories and mythologies that surround them. Their name, in this context, serves not merely as a label, but as an invitation, a symbolic doorway into a unique musical world where the colossal and the intricate, the powerful and the delicate, the ancient and the modern, dance together in perfect, if often bewildering and exhilarating, harmony. It's a subtle challenge to the listener to embrace this inherent paradox, to find the profound beauty that often resides in its artfully resolved contradictions, and to engage with music that demands more than passive consumption. The true original spark for the name Gentle Giant, therefore, seems to be less a single, easily pinpointable historical source, a specific page in Rabelais, or a particular forgotten folktale, and more a conceptual necessity, an intuitive recognition of an identity that found its perfect linguistic expression in that wonderfully oxymoronic phrase. The Shulman brothers and their gifted bandmates, Kerry Minnear, with his classically trained keyboard virtuosity and unique compositional voice, Gary Green, with his versatile and always tasteful guitar work, and their succession of brilliant drummers, were collectively forging a new and audacious sound, treading a path far less traveled even within the already adventurous and eclectic landscape of early 1970s progressive rock. They needed an identity, a banner, a name that could effectively contain and communicate their multifaceted ambitions, their eclectic influences, and their uncompromising artistic vision. Gentle Giant provided that identity with remarkable concision and evocative power. Whether the specific phrase was ultimately plucked from the pages of Rabelais by a scholarly band member, whispered from a half-remembered children's book, or coined in a moment of inspiration during a brainstorming session with a clever manager or a perceptive A&R man, its final selection was undoubtedly an act of profound self-awareness and artistic intentionality. It was, in effect, a declaration of intent, a mission statement condensed into two perfectly balanced words. We will be mighty, yet we will be subtle. We will be complex and challenging, yet we will also offer moments of exquisite beauty and charm, accessible to those willing to truly listen, to engage, and to explore. So, the next time you decide to immerse yourself in their extraordinary catalog, the next time you drop the needle on iconic albums like Octopus, with its kaleidoscopic array of styles and textures, or acquiring the taste, their ambitious and self-assured sophomore effort, or the critically acclaimed The Power and the Glory, or even the somewhat more streamlined but still uniquely giant-esque later works, make a conscious effort to listen specifically for that inherent duality, that constant creative tension and interplay between the gentle and the giant. Listen for the delicate, almost ethereal caress of Kerry Minnear's vibraphone or his intricate recorder melodies, for Ray Shulman's incredibly lyrical and inventive bass lines that often acted as a third melodic voice, or for Phil Shulman's sensitive and expressive saxophone and clarinet passages from their earlier albums. And then, in the very next moment, or sometimes simultaneously. Feel the undeniable, often visceral impact of Gary Green's incisive blues rock-inflected guitar solos or his powerful, chunky rhythm work, John Weather's intricate, powerful, and astonishingly versatile drumming, and the sheer, unadulterated intellectual and emotional force of their ensemble playing, where every member contributed to a rich, cohesive, and utterly unique whole. The name Gentle Giant is not just a label affixed to an album cover. It's a key, a vital Rosetta Stone for deciphering their unique and often challenging musical language. It serves as a constant reminder that true artistic strength often lies not in brute force alone, but in the ability to modulate immense power with exquisite grace, profound intelligence, and subtle nuance. It underscores the idea that the most profound and enduring artistic statements are often those that courageously embrace and artfully reconcile apparent contradictions, finding unity in diversity and harmony in complexity. Gentle Giant, in their carefully chosen name and, more importantly, in their consistently brilliant and uncompromising music, achieved this delicate balance with an artistry, a dedication, and a level of sheer musicality that continues to fascinate, inspire, and reward dedicated listeners decades after their relatively short but incredibly productive career. Their legacy is a powerful testament to the enduring fact that music can be both deeply intellectually stimulating and profoundly emotionally resonant, challenging to the mind, and yet, ultimately, deeply rewarding to the soul. They prove that complexity and accessibility, at least for the adventurous listener, are not mutually exclusive. I sincerely hope that this extended exploration, this deep dive into the nuances and possibilities surrounding a seemingly simple question, has illuminated not just the potential origins of a fascinating band name, but also, and more significantly, the unique spirit, the uncompromising vision, and the exceptional musicianship of a truly exceptional group of artists. The quest for such origins, as we've seen, often tells us as much about our own human desire for meaning, for narrative coherence, and for connection with the art we love, as it does about the objective historical facts of the subject itself. And in the case of Gentle Giant, the narrative surrounding their name, much like their music, is as rich, as layered, and as endlessly intriguing as their most complex compositions. The ambiguity itself becomes part of the allure. Thank you, most sincerely, for joining me on this deep dive, this extended meditation on a name and the universe of music it represents. If you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of progressive rock history, if your curiosity has been piqued and your appreciation deepened, please, once more, consider lending your invaluable support by subscribing to PsychProg. There are countless more mysteries to unravel, myriad other sonic landscapes to explore, and many more deep analyses awaiting you in our other videos. Click that notification bell so you don't miss our future explorations. Share this video with fellow music enthusiasts who appreciate a deeper look, and let's collectively keep the vibrant spirit of adventurous, thoughtful listening alive and well in a world that often prioritizes the superficial.